Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. This is a full-length podcast we've got today. I've got Dan. This is myself, obviously, Dan Sfera. I've got him here. I've also got Chris Sauber here in the other window that you can see we are properly distanced, socially distanced from each other. And we're going to we're going to actually go into the listener grab bag mailbox and answer an interesting question. It's a long question, but I think it's good. And then we got our webinar later today. So you guys, you don't want to miss out on that either. You have to, basically, you've got to go subscribe to the clinicaltrialsguru.com and enter your email address in there to not miss out on any of these things. It would be a shame to miss out on these things. So anyways, thank you for joining, Chris.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So ready to get into these questions? Are you
Absolutely
bursting at the seams with excitement?
Bursting. Bursting. It's Christmas morning and I'm 10 again.
Oh, good. That's the energy levels we need. Absolutely. So basically, let me read the question. So this person's saying they're trying to learn the landscape of the industry. They're saying, okay, I see you have the pharmas, the biotechs, then the CROs, and then you have all these companies. They're talking about vendors, right? Like Science 37, Medable, Metadata, that are offering solutions in order to provide biotechs and pharmas with better data, modular, flexible, and remote trials. I know many of these companies have actually benefited from COVID, as there's been a real need for remote trials. The question I have are, how do these companies usually work with CROs and biotechs? And then there's more questions. Apart from being time poor, risk averse, and often sticking to the status quo, why would pharma or CRO be skeptical about hiring these kind of companies? What are the biggest pain points for CROs and pharma when it comes to working with these companies? And if you were working at one of these companies and you were trying to sell your product to pharma CRO, how would you do it? What would they want to hear? What's the key sell? So those are the questions this person has. It's about vendors and pharma's interest in them, CRO's interest in them, and the like. You want to take a stab at this one first?
Well, to fulfill most of the questions there, it's just to answer most of the questions there, you have to fulfill a need, right? I mean, that's how you're going to sell yourself. That's I forget the initial question, but the answer is that as well. It's just a matter of filling a need. And maybe you fill it better than previous vendors. Maybe you're meeting a need that's unknown or hasn't been considered. This is how you would present your your company to these
right
to the pharma industry.
Exactly. So the first question is, how do these companies typically work with CROs? Well, they work like, they're considered a vendor. Technically, if you're a research site and you work with a pharma company, you're a vendor as well.
You're fulfilling a need. You're fulfilling a need as well as a site. The need is we need patients.
Exactly. At the end of the day, the last thing these pharmaceutical sponsors need is another vendor. At the end of the day, so you, like Chris said, what is your value prop? Why should they bring you on? It's research has already been established that these days you need a EDC system. And with that EDC system, you would need some analytics behind it. You would need some site tracking metrics. When it comes to the newer things like remote monitoring, or even if we get into virtual trials, all right, well, we're going to need a remote monitoring platform. I mean, how are the sites going to put the source data into a remote platform? How is the monitor going to look at it? Like, these are the things you got to ask yourself.
So let's take EDC for example, right?
Okay.
There's many EDC vendors, right? And they all primarily do the same thing.
A dime a dozen.
They allow the site to input the source documentation that the site has collected, the data on, whether it be a paper form or an electronic form. They allow the site to then place this data within a system that the sponsor has access to. Okay, so they can see the same data. So that's essentially what they all do. Now, how do you separate yourself from these vendors and you want to do EDC? Maybe you incorporate IWRS into that. Maybe you incorporate um, ERT into that. Maybe you incorporate some sort of scanning where you can scan the documents, like say Intralink Stan. You can scan the documentation there because we're doing a remote monitoring. You can add these platforms so you're not increasing the site's necessity for more passwords. It's the same password, same login information, and you can do all of these different services right there. That would be one way to separate yourself from these other EDC vendors. You just kind of snowball everything into one spot, right? Where all these different things that I had previously mentioned, ERT, IWRS, they all require different logins. They all are through different vendors. So that would be one way to separate yourself from these other vendors.
Right. I think it goes. It's a probably the most underrated concept in clinical research is how many passwords a study coordinator has to keep track of for just one study. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have a vendor for just about everything. Now you want to bring in electronic informed consent. So now you got another vendor for that. Now you've got a EDC. Now you've got a IWRS. Now you've got a IRB portal. Now you've got a lab portal, most likely. Now you've got
ERT.
ERT, right, for the ECG. Now you've got who knows what else. There's all kinds of vendors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's before you incorporate remote monitoring. That's
Mm-hmm.
before you even start to dream of virtual trial. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about virtual trial where the patients are not coming into the office, now you've got a telehealth platform. Now you probably got a chat feature with a patient. All these are just adding to the passwords that a coordinator, that the login information that a coordinator needs to keep track of. And
Mm-hmm.
that leads into the second question this person has. Why would pharma companies be skeptical about hiring these kind of vendors? And it's exactly that, site compliance, right? There's even vendors for patient recruitment where you
Not
need
only
a
that, but
password to log in and see where your leads, this patient leads are coming from, which coordinators don't even do. Not to mention they don't have the time, but they have another login credential to keep track of.
not only that, but other vendors are proven commodities, and that's why they're skeptical of taking somebody new on. Right?
Mm.
You're not a proven commodity. So how can we trust that you have the capabilities you say you have, even if you demonstrate? How do we know that you're going to be responsible with this information, or whatever the concerns are? How do they know you're not a proven commodity? They have proven
Mm.
commodities. They already work with these.
Very good point, actually. We're a vendor. DSCS is a vendor for pharma. We're negotiating for a relatively big project for ourselves with a very big pharma.
Mm-hmm.
And their biggest, I mean, I'm just going to answer this question from personal experiences. Their biggest objection is, why should we hire you where we can go with the established player already, even if they're not as good as you, because we're pretty niche at what we do. So I think we're much better than what the bigger
Mm-hmm.
player can offer. But why would we take a risk? And this is a middle manager asking this question. This is not like the CEO or the founder of the company. There's no such thing as that at these levels of companies. This is a middle manager trying to keep his job, trying to keep her job. Why would they go with the unproven and take a risk just for marginal benefits as opposed to just going with the traditional where they can't get in trouble even if there's no results? They're not going to get in trouble for selecting that vendor because
Yep, we've
everybody
used them
selects that
before,
vendor.
or we've used them before. There's never been a complaint, so we're going to continue using them.
Exactly. That's the kind of decision that will not get me fired as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to a decision that I'm going to have to take a risk on. I could potentially get fired, but they're probably better and they're cheaper. So which
And
one are
you
you going to go with?
may get as that middle manager, you may get a slight reward, or at least an acknowledgement. Hey, good decision there going with them, and maybe that's all you get. So exactly, yeah, without a doubt.
So that's the biggest challenge facing these vendors. It's very tough to get in as a vendor. I think your best bet is the way Chris and I did it, and this is actually going to add another layer of complexity to the vendor question, because this leads in, I like all these answers that we're giving kind of leads into the next question. What's the biggest pain point for the CRO and the pharma? In my opinion, the biggest pain point is patient accrual. And
Oh, without a doubt.
and if you deconstruct what that actually means, that means vendors, even if you're a pharma company and you hire a vendor to accrue patients, let's say you hire a central recruitment firm, the site is the only one that can actually screen those patients. So if you've got a site that's overworked and overburdened, and they're not even screening their own patients in their system, which happens all the time, by the way. Sites have patients in their own database internally to their site that they're not screening because they don't have time. What makes you think that they're going to go to an external vendor platform? What makes you even think they're going to remember the password? Okay. And so even to be able to log in. And meanwhile, the sponsor's paying money for all those leads that this patient recruitment vendor is generating. And those leads are going unused because the coordinators not even have time to go into their own system and look for patients. So the biggest pain point is sites being overburdened, if you really break it down. Because yes, the biggest pain point is patient accrual, but if you break that down to the least common denominator, right? It's the least common denominator, right? Not the greatest.
Is what you're implying, no least. So, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think certainly that applies to many sites, but it's one or the other, right? Because I'm sure there's sites that aren't overburdened. They don't have access to the patients. So it's one or the other, right? You could address either, I think, and you'll find room in the industry, right?
I think if you take 100 sites, let's say you take just one study at random that has 100 sites participating.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to have like 10% of those sites, that's going to be their first trial. Okay. I think those sites are not overburdened. I think those sites are ready to go. They're motivated, right? That's only 10% of those sites. That's 10 sites. I think the rest are experienced sites that are doing multiple studies, especially in a year like 2021, where they're doing multiple studies. And they just don't have time. So I think the overburdened aspect is a majority of the
I
sites.
don't think it. See, I would disagree. I don't think it's that high. I would speculate it's probably 70, 30, 60, 40, something like that. I think that a lot of these sites if they're taking on numerous studies and they're also seeing patients, those are the more likely sites that you're going to have that are overburdened, right? In which they're
Okay.
both a private practice that has taken on numerous studies. They're spreading their time very thin.
It also
If you're
depends. Well, this topic we can unpack it and have a lengthy discussion on. Maybe we'll do that right now. It also depends who you ask at the site.
Oh, absolutely.
If
They're
you
all
ask
going to
the
say if they want to
coordinator,
study.
well, no. Let's say you and we're not awarding any study. We go to these 100 sites participating in this
Oh,
study.
sure. I agree with what you're about to say as well.
And we go ask the PI, hey, are you overburdened? PI is most likely going to say no. You go ask that PI's coordinator, are you overburdened? They're going to laugh and roll their eyes and say, what do you think? Right? Well, I mean, we know this. We go to a site and monitor right now, 2 sites, where you would ask the PI, are you overburdened? They would say no. You go ask the coordinator, and they barely have time to answer your question.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a big pain point that the industry doesn't talk about enough.
So both of those sites, and again, I would say sponsors primarily select sites that have a private practice, but both of those sites have a private practice or have a clinic, right? Um, I think if you were going to focus primarily or solely on just research sites, I think that's a completely different story in terms of overburden. Just because, again, the sites spread thin when they're seeing patients in clinic and patients for research,
Right.
more likely are overburdened.
Yeah, when you separate the research from the private practice, but even these sites, right? The one where we have the coordinator, he's actually texting me now. And then the other one that we go to in LA, those coordinator don't do anything with the private practice, from what I understand. They're overburdened with just the research that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like a undiscussed, under discussed. What's the word? It's too early. Under discussed phenomenon in the industry that you don't really understand unless you get your hands dirty and start talking on the ground level with the soldiers doing battle. And the PIs are
Yeah,
usually like the generals.
sure. But
PI is the general. You have
if
some
you're a CR,
generals that lead from the front, and you have some generals lead from the back.
but if you're a CRA questioning the coordinator about this and you're looking to place a study, they're not going to tell you the truth. I mean,
No,
forget it.
they won't. That's another thing, right? But
You know,
we're not talking about site selection right now. We're talking about just what the pharma industry's biggest pain point is, and it's
sure, but I'm talking about how do you address that?
mm,
There's no way.
mm-mm.
I don't think there's a way to address it.
There is. The first thing you brought up when we first started this podcast. If you can combine some of these vendors into one, okay? So if you can take the EDC and it could become the platform where patient leads come in, and it could
Sure.
become the platform for where eSource is used and IWRS. I've already worked as a CRA. I've worked on one platform where the EDC system is the IWRS system.
Yeah, I've seen that a couple times.
It's helped the coordinators out tremendously. So if you consolidate some of these functions into one platform, I think metadata is the best one capable of doing this right now. You're making a coordinator's life that much easier.
Yeah, but at best you're saving 5% of time. At best, 5%.
But that adds up, right? Over multiple studies. The
Sure.
coordinator's typically managing what, like 4 to 8 studies?
Well, I don't know if that many, but
Sometimes
they
more.
keep.
Depends.
Sure, depends on the situation, how hard, difficult the studies are.
Let's say on average four studies per coordinator, right? That they're managing.
Yeah, that's
I mean, you're saving
probably reasonable.
5% of time on each of those protocols. That's 20% of their overall time.
Sure.
So if you're a vendor, bottom line is if you're a vendor and you're trying to get in, which it sounds like what this person's doing, and this is leads to their final question. If you were working at one of these companies and you were trying to sell your product to pharma or CROs, how would you do it? What would they want to hear? What's the key sell? There's probably different ways to peel this onion. Uh, but one of the things I would do is talk about how you're making life simpler for the coordinator. And these are things they don't even consider, most of these
I was just
vendors.
going to say, you'd have to point out why it's substantial that you're making it easier for the coordinator as well. Because as you were just saying, I don't think pharma companies consider that much.
But you know who's doing a really good job at this?
Hmm.
Viva. Viva, the biggest, one of the biggest. Viva's like one of the biggest tech vendors in this space. Like their market cap's bigger than some of these drug companies. They
Mm-hmm.
created Viva Vault for sites, free, free version of Viva Vault, where you can just scan. You can do e-regulatory for free at your site. Now they have a Trojan horse into the sites because so many sites use it because it's free and it truly makes their life easier. Now they can go to sponsors and they have leverage and they can say, look, we have 10,000 sites using Viva Vault. If you sign up with us for your next study, the sites already know how to use it. You don't need to train them on it. They're already using it. If you have the capital to invest in this in the freemium version, you hit the sites, you give it to the sites, and you can get paid from the sponsors. Trojan horse your way into it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? You agree?
Oh, for Viva Vault, sure. I don't know
They
about a
get a big
startup.
market cap. For a startup, you better be well funded. And a lot of these startups like Medable, actually I have their pen right here. Medable. I met them at DIA or at Bio last year when you can still go to conferences. We'll get there
Free
again.
plug. Free
Free
plug.
plug. I'm supposed to interview their founder. Free plug. They just raised more money, by the way. Free plug. I don't think they are making money. Free plug. Uh, but they are raising money, right? Because
Sure.
I mean, this is what venture capitalists do. This is what they want to invest in. So a company like Medable or like some of the other ones they mentioned, Science 37, they're well funded, right? And they're not necessarily looking at making a profit. They want to make it's like Instagram. Like Instagram when it came out, like their job was not to make money from day one. Their job was to get as many people like me and you to start using Instagram because then that makes it a valuable target for someone like Facebook to acquire. So you
Hmm.
just Trojan horse your way into it. And by the way, in social media, we are the products. Like we are the users are the product. In a similar way, the sites in research would be the product because if they're adopting your service for free, now you can go to the sponsor and say, "Hey, we already have all these sites using it." So it would make sense for you to make us your vendor for your next 12 protocols.
Hmm.
Only if you
Certainly.
can do it. It's if you're a startup and you're not capitalized well and you're trying to make money from the sites, forget about it. I don't think sites are paying for things these days. At the most, they're paying for eSource, and even that, they're usually getting it reimbursed from the drug companies.
Well, they'll pay for patient recruitment too, but you're going to be priced differently for a site than a sponsor. What I mean by that is a sponsor is going to pay you typically for screen fails as well, and a site is not going to do that. You're going to get paid on randomizations only.
Right. And we've discussed it with patient recruitment vendors, what they charge a site for a patient lead versus what they charge a sponsor for a patient lead. The same patient
It
is like 30x differential.
can be. Yeah.
And so I really think that's the way to go. If you're trying to, like I said, if you're a startup trying to sell something to a site, good luck. I think eSource can do it. Even that was tough. Like Ray from Creo, but I think he finally succeeded, and he helped the sites get that money reimbursed by the sponsors, which was helpful. Like he created the policies, the justification letters, all that stuff, so you
Hmm.
can just send it to the sponsor and get that reimbursed. But sites to come out of pocket, good luck with that. Good luck with that strategy. I don't think that's a strategy that will work.
Well, I think it worked for Study Kick. I don't think they started with They started with sites, I believe. They didn't start with a sponsor. Again, though, you can only do it typically in terms of randomizations.
Right. For the study kick, for those that don't know, is a patient recruitment vendor. But even they would have justifications for the sites to get reimbursed.
And they have a different model as well. They have levels.
Right.
If you're on their cheap level, which I forget their naming structure,
Right.
if you're on the cheap level, it's like $100 a month.
Yeah, it's like
And if
bronze,
you're
silver, gold, and platinum or something like that.
right, and then platinum is like 2,000 a month or something.
We actually heard from a site that we know that their platinum is the way to go.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few sites,
So
but
that
it's
might be
expensive.
something, it's expensive, but if you can get that reimbursed, at least half of the year reimbursed, right? So 6 grand instead of, or wait, 2,000 a month would be 24,000 a year. So if you can get like 12,000 reimbursed, half of the year reimbursed. I mean, even if the patients are coming in, you're making money over the 2,000 a month.
Right. Sponsors typically going to work on maybe they might go $6,000, so you'll get up for 3 months. But I think that's enough time to realize that it works, and then you can demonstrate this to the sponsor, and they'll give you more funding.
Yeah. And then you're in, I mean, as long as you're profitable, you keep using it.
Hmm.
So we're thinking about starting a new site in Yuma, right? And this might be one of the things we look into as well as we get the ball rolling.
Sure.
But I mean, as far as like data analytics or just sites to make their workflow easier, I don't think sites are going to be paying necessarily for this. Closest thing you have is like the eSource and the CTMS system. CTMS system, clinical trial management system, is how sites track their budgets and what patients came in and all those things. They will pay for those kind of things. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about like what a Medable does, which makes e-consent easier or virtual trials easier, sites are not paying for that. They're expecting the sponsors to pay for these things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
100% agree.
for sites, it's mostly offense related. Anything else we missed? I think you covered it enough.
I think so. I'm sure we missed something, but I can't think of anything.
Well, thank you guys for listening and watching, and thank you, Chris, for taking the time out of your day to do this podcast. And we will be on the webinar in 2 hours.
Yep. Sounds good.
Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.